Of the many arguments for God on the market today, I think there's one in particular that doesn't get enough attention, and that's St. Augustine's argument from the existence of objective truth. So in this video, I'm going to unpack this underappreciated argument for God's existence. Augustine's argument, which comes from his short work on free choice of the will, begins with the question of whether there is such a thing as objective truth. This is a pretty crucial question, because hundreds of years before Augustine's time, there was a philosopher named Protagoras who argued that man is the measure of all things. In other words, that human beings are the ones who get to decide whether something's true or not. Today, this position is known as relativism, and it's actually a pretty popular idea in contemporary thought. After all, whenever you hear anyone talking about pursuing his truth, or whenever someone dismisses something you've just said as just your truth, that person is assuming relativism. He's assuming that human beings are the ones who get to decide what's true, and that they can therefore have their own individual personal truths. But Augustine sees some major problems with this view, and suggests that however we understand reality, we have to leave room for objective truth. Probably the biggest problem with relativism is that it leads to contradictions. If man is the measure of what's true, as Protagoras suggested, then what happens if you have two people who believe that opposite and contradictory things are true? If I think that 2 + 2 = 5, and you think that 2 + 2 = 4, then we believe conflicting things. But in order to be consistent, a relativist would have to say that neither of us is wrong. We just have different truths, and neither is more true than the other. But this violates the law of non-contradiction, which says that nothing can both be and not be at the same time and in the same respect. According to this law, which forms the basis of all of logic, 2 + 2 can't both equal 4 and equal 5. That's it, plain and simple. It has to be one way or the other, and so relativism must be false. Also, another problem with relativism is we all just know there has to be objective truth. We all know that 2 + 2 = 4. We've learned this in elementary school. We've seen it play out thousands, if not millions of times in the real world. We just know that whenever you have two objects next to two objects, you've got four objects, and that's true not just for you, but for everyone. But according to relativism, we can't really know this. All we can know is that 2 + 2 = 4 for us, not for everyone. In fact, under relativism, we can't know that anything is absolutely true for anyone. The sky might look blue to me, but who am I to disagree with you if you say that it looks green? I might think that George Washington was the first president of the United States, but hey, that's just my truth. What's to say that it wasn't actually John Adams? You see the problem here? If we accept relativism, if we can't say that some things are just true for everyone, absolutely, then we have to get rid of the idea that we can have any kind of knowledge at all. After all, knowledge is about knowing what's objectively true. And if nothing is objectively true, there's no knowledge. That means we'd have to get rid of all bodies of learning: math, science, history, sociology, philosophy. Indeed, paradoxically, we would even have to get rid of the claim that man is the measure of all things, which means that relativism, in addition to leading to the absurd conclusion that we can't actually know anything to be true, turns out to be self-contradicting. Therefore, relativism must be false. For this reason, St. Augustine sets out to create a system for understanding the world that allows us to avoid relativism. But as it turns out, this isn't so simple a task as it might appear. Clearly, if we want to avoid relativism, we have to say that truth is objective, because that's exactly what relativism is denying. But if you look around the world, one thing you'll notice is that things are always changing. When it comes to the world around us, what's true today might not be true tomorrow, or even 5 minutes from now. Right now, I'm sitting in this chair recording a video, but chances are I'm not going to be doing this in half an hour. The sun is in the sky right now, it's daytime, but later, it's going to not be in the sky. This world is permeated with change, and nothing about the world is true absolutely. So, one might argue, doesn't that mean that truth can't be objective, since what's true at one point isn't necessarily going to be true at another point? To state this argument more formally, if relativism is false, truth must be unchanging, since if truth could change, it wouldn't be objective. But everything in the material world is changing. Therefore, we either have to conclude that relativism is true, which we've already said we can't do, or we say that objective truth must be grounded ultimately in something which isn't part of the material world. And this is the route Augustine will take. In On Free Choice of the Will, Augustine says that 7 and 3 are 10, not only now, but always. and asks how this could be true even if there happened at some point in the history of the world to not be 7 and 3 material objects making up 10. His answer? The unchanging truth that 7 and 3 equals 10 doesn't just reside in material things, but in something immaterial, something outside of the material realm, allowing the truth to remain unchanging even as the material world changes. Indeed, Augustine will argue that every objective truth must exist immaterially, must exist outside of the physical world in order to ensure that they stay objectively true through all the constant change which the world is undergoing. Just like how the fact that 7 plus 3 equals 10 will never change, what it is to be a dog or a tree or a human being will never change, even as particular dogs or trees or people die and other ones come into existence. And even if, tragically, every dog went out of existence tomorrow, what it is to be a dog would remain unchanged, because what it is to be a dog isn't grounded in particular dogs which exist in the world, but in the immaterial truth of what it is to be a dog. Now, if you know anything about Greek philosophy, this might be starting to sound a little familiar to something that the philosopher Plato said long before Augustine's time. Plato argued that everything in the physical world is modeled after objects in an immaterial, unchanging realm of universal forms, and that whenever we make a claim about the nature of the world, we're really just making a claim about the world of forms, which, for Plato, provided the basis for every truth claim. According to Plato, when we say something like 7 plus 3 equals 10, or dogs have 4 feet, we mean that the unchanging form of 7 and the unchanging form of 3 always and eternally add up to 10, and that the eternal, unchanging form of a dog has 4 feet. You might be asking yourself what an unchanging, eternal form of a dog could even look like, or if that's even a coherent concept. If so, you're not alone, and many philosophers have had problems with Plato's theory of forms over the years, including Augustine. Augustine's main problem with the forms is that they don't seem like a complete good explanation. After all, for Plato, these forms just kind of exist in the realm of forms. They don't do anything, they don't act, they don't relate to the physical world in any way. They're just kind of these inert, abstract objects just kind of doing whatever the immaterial version of floating off by themselves in space is. What's more, for Plato, these forms are entirely disconnected from each other. They don't relate to each other in any way. But this doesn't make a lot of sense, because in the real world, concepts are related to each other in all these super intricate ways. So shouldn't the forms be related to each other too? To solve these problems, and a couple other ones, Augustine proposes a modification of Plato's theory. Instead of saying that the forms are a collection of inert objects metaphorically floating by themselves in a realm of forms, Augustine suggests that every form is actually only a different way of looking at one overarching form, the form of truth. For Augustine, the only real form is the form of truth itself, which every other form participates in order to exist. This would explain how the different forms can be related to each other, like the different objects in the physical world are related to each other. In addition, Augustine argues that the form of truth is not this inert, abstract object, but a personal being. His reason for doing this is simple. If the form of truth is the standard for every objective truth, then it must be the standard for human reason. But every standard must be higher than that which it is the standard for. There's a reason, after all, why we address a judge in a courtroom as Your Honor. We're recognizing that a judge needs to be in some sense higher than the people he's judging, even though in this case he's just higher in authority, not in being. But when it comes to a standard for reason itself, we can't just have something that's high in authority. We need something that's higher in the property in question, reason. Therefore, the form of truth, if it really is to be a standard for human reason, must have reason more abundantly than even a human being's reason does. And it therefore isn't just a person, but a super person above every person here on Earth. But if the form of truth is a personal being, and in fact a super personal one, then we have an explanation of how it's able to relate to the material world, since personal beings, even immaterial personal beings, are able to act in a way that abstract objects can't. They can relate themselves to the physical world in a way that abstract objects never would be able to do. This, in turn, allows us to explain how all the other forms which participate in the form of truth are able to relate to the world, since we can just say that they are ideas within the mind of the one personal being that is the form of truth. So Augustine's theory, as it turns out, solves the two biggest problems with Plato's theory of forms. It both explains how the forms are related to each other and also explains how they're related to the material world. Now, to be honest, this is about as far as Augustine takes his argument. He ends by declaring that anything which is higher than our mind and our reason is God, and declares that no one is happier than the one who enjoys the firm, unchanging, most excellent truth by contemplating God. Personally, I find the way that Augustine ends his argument a bit unsatisfactory. I actually think that he could have pressed this a bit further and argued that truth, when you get down to it, is a kind of existence. It's a kind of being. After all, we call a thing true when it reflects the way that things really exist. So if God is truth itself, then it stands to reason that he also must be being itself. But from this description of God as being itself follows all of his classical attributes: omnipotence, omniscience, all goodness, perfect simplicity, pure actuality, eternity. Since all of these properties are necessary for a thing to be truly being itself, as I've talked about ad infinitum in previous videos. So if Augustine had pressed his argument just a bit further, he could have firmly established the existence of the God of classical theism. As it is, he left that part of the task to later thinkers, like the Catholic philosopher Edward Feser, who, in his 2017 book, 5 Proofs of the Existence of God, gave a more fleshed-out version of Augustine's argument than even Augustine himself was able to do. And if you want to learn more about this argument, I recommend checking out that work. But even with how Augustine left it, this is still an extremely fascinating argument, and one which, with just a little bit more work, was able to become one of the strongest arguments for God in history. At least, that's what I think. Whatever you think of this argument, though, I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. Thanks for watching, and God bless.